We're looking at Jesus as a teacher. We're looking at a lot of things about it, his character as a teacher, his personality, his approach, certainly some of his methodology. And last week we had started talking about his use of questions. How much of the gospel accounts really are made up of questions and answers. And maybe that's, as we said, not surprising, since when we're discussing God's Word, we're usually asking a lot of questions and looking for answers. But Jesus was a master of both asking and answering. And we talked about there are different kinds of questions, rhetorical and leading and informational. Sometimes you want to know something, or you need to know something. And Jesus was no different when he walked this earth. But certainly when we talk about his use of questions, we're really talking about his didactic use of them, his use of questions in teaching. Sometimes, you ask questions for several reasons. You can ask rhetorical questions just because it adds it's a little bit more interesting perhaps than just a simple statement. But more often than not, what we see when we look at Jesus' use of questions is he would use them on many occasions to answer questions, right? And I think we talked a little bit about that last week. Somebody would ask him a question, and he would answer their question with a question. And why would you do that? Why would you do that? What's perhaps when we read the gospel accounts and we see him doing that, what do we see generally his purpose?
The question being asked him is not genuine.
Yeah, and that's one. But even let's just put that aside for the moment. Let's assume it is a genuine question. You ask me a question, why would I maybe respond with a question? What would be my purpose in that?
It requires you to think, and it engages you, and if you can discover it yourself, you learn it better than you do with someone just telling you.
Absolutely. It requires you to think, number one. It requires you to analyze and reason things out. And if you discover a truth for yourself, more than likely, not only will you remember it better, but you'll actually accept it. And it's hard to get mad, too, and be prejudiced against an answer if you come to that conclusion yourself, rather than you just ask me a question. People do this to members of the Lord's church all the time. Well, why do y'all use instrumental music? Well, what happens if you just answer the question? You go into some discussion about biblical authority and this, that, and the other, and it's not authorized. What happens at the end of it? One or two things, generally. Either one, they're satisfied, oh, okay. And then they go on their merry way, but that doesn't help them any, right? They don't change. They say, okay, well, you answered my question as to why y'all believe that. Or two, the other option might be that they get mad about it, right? So you can avoid both of those things perhaps by not being so eager. We think we're doing people a favor, maybe not so. We want to get them, we want to, as they talk about in that particular personal evangelism method that Fishers of Men uses, you want to, as they like to say, develop interest. And you do that with questions, generally speaking, and that's the way Jesus used them, to try to get people to think and to reason, to come to their own correct conclusions. And so that's why he would do it. Well, it's interesting that some critics of the Bible would complain that Jesus, by using this method, was not dealing fairly with his questioners. If a real man would just come out and answer the question, why dilly-dally? Why beat around the bush? Why be, coy about things? Again, they're missing the whole point of why he would do that. You think about the time they came to him and they said, by what authority are you doing these things? Remember? Matthew 21. By what authority are you doing these things? Well, he changed the subject A little bit, but not really. How did he answer that question? How did he answer the question?
By whose authority is John doing it?
If they had answered his question, the answer to his question was the answer to their question. See? Why? Why do I say that? Right, because here's the thing. If they had reasoned correctly about that, he would have said, if they'd have come to the correct conclusion, well, it's from heaven, it's from God, John's authority. He actually said, with his baptism, from heaven or of men. Where did he get his authority? Well, if they said it came from God, then what would they have to admit? Because John did what? He testified of who? Jesus. John said, he's the Christ. So if these fellows had said, well, John came from God, his authority was from God, if they reasoned through Jesus' question, the only conclusion they would have come to would have been that Jesus was from God and his authority was from God, but they were dishonest. And so as we like to say in our modern jargon, they took the fifth. They wouldn't answer the question. So that's one reason you do it, is to try, because his question contained the answer. But here's the other problem. When you ask somebody a question, now unless you're under an obligation, a particular and peculiar obligation to answer a question, like you're taking a test, the teacher's giving you an examination, you have to answer the questions. If you're in court or testifying, you have to answer the questions. But other than that, if somebody asks you a question, what are they really asking from you? Yeah, but more than that. What are they asking? Anytime somebody asks you a question under which you have no obligation to answer, which you don't, except in a few specific circumstances, they're asking you a favor. They're really saying, I need a favor from you. So for somebody to say, well, you have to answer my question, but they don't have to answer yours? They don't have a right to ask a favor and you not ask one back. And in fact, there's a lot of times I'm not under any obligation to answer your questions. You might ask me a question about something that's none of your business. I might do the same to you. Am I under obligation to answer it? It's funny to me, I've run across people that think that for some reason, I know some people, that think when the phone rings, what? They have to answer it. No, you don't. You don't have to answer the phone. You're not under any obligation to answer the phone. And it's rude to answer the phone when you're talking to somebody else. That's why they have to put place signs up all over town that say, you know, when you're in the bank drive-thru or you're up here ordering at McDonald's, please don't get on your cell phone. Because it's rude. You've interrupted your conversation with another person to answer the phone. You don't have to answer the phone. And I don't have to answer all your questions, and you don't have to answer all mine. But Jesus was using it to get them to come to the right conclusion. It also, when you answer a question with a question like he did on many occasions, it requires a person to take a position. Sometimes people will come to me and they say, well, you know, and I've been put in this situation a lot as an elder. They'll say, well, I don't like X. You know, I don't like the way we do X or Y, or I don't think we should do it that way. I don't believe that's the correct way or the scriptural way or whatever. Well, that's fine. I have no problem with that. That's what I'm here for. You know, bring me your poor, your downtrodden, your complaints, whatever. But what I generally say is, at that point, I could go through some reasoned explanation of why something's right or wrong. But as has already been pointed out, you really don't learn a whole lot from that. This is a teaching moment. So when somebody comes to me generally and says, well, I don't think this is let's say they said, I don't think what we're doing here, X, Y, and Z is a scriptural way of doing something. The first thing I say is, well, give me your argument. Tell me why it's not. Reason it out for me. I need to know where you're coming from on it. And half the time, you know what happens? I don't know. Well, you got to have a little more than that. Now, some people are honest enough to know that. Miss Helen used to come to me and say, well, I don't like X. I don't like the way we do that. I said, well, you know, Miss Helen, you know there's nothing wrong with that scripturally, you know. And then she'd smile and say, well, I know, I just don't like it that way. Okay, yeah, that's fine, be honest, you know. She'd say, I know, I just don't like it like that. I said, okay, that's fine, it's a personal choice, it's a personal preference. As long as you understand that and you understand the reasoning behind it, I have no problem with that. You come to me and say, well, I don't like the way we do that, but it's not really because there's anything wrong with it, it's just I don't like it like that. Okay. We've all got stuff like that. We've all got our own personal opinions about the way we like to see things done or not done. But again, it's about making people think, and then if they are honest enough to think through it, reason through it, and answer the question correctly, they will then most likely accept it and remember it. So it's interesting, you know, not long after that, Jesus was approached by, you know, the Sadducees, and we talked about how they denied the resurrection. And then he goes through this. Well, first of all, he used that to do what? What was he pointing out to them? Their error, right? Have you not read? You do err not knowing the Scriptures. I think it's interesting too, he used it to test people, challenge their confidence in him. If you go to John 6:5, when the disciples came to him and said, oh, we got all these people, how are we going to feed them? It said Jesus did what to Philip when he asked him the question? He said, where are we going to get all this? Where are we going to get food to feed all these people? This he said doing what? The Bible says. Testing him. Challenging his confidence in Christ. You know, the disciples in their thinking could not think of a financial way to feed these people. But Jesus, by asking them, was trying to get them to see what? You don't need it. You don't need a financial way, right? You just have confidence in me. He sometimes would use questions to get them to make a complete declaration of their faith. You remember Matthew 16. They came into the region of Caesarea Philippi. What did Jesus say? What did he say? Who do people what? Say that I am. There's a question. Who do people say that I am? Well, some say you're this person, some say you're that person. Well, who do you say that I am? Right? Again, he's using a series of questions to get them to make a full declaration in their faith in him. He used a question to test Philip's faith and the rest of the disciples at the same time. I like what one person said. The point is this. His skill in knowing how to ask the right questions to the right people at precisely the right time and for the right reason was nothing short of phenomenal. Because he knew human nature, of course. So he knew how to ask them, but on the other hand, Jesus knew how to answer them. One professor cataloged 103 separate questions the Lord was asked. One researcher said that Jesus answered approximately 1 out of every 4 questions with a question of his own. And also, we need to understand that sometimes Jesus was asked questions and he ignored them. The Proverbs writer, Proverbs 26, says sometimes a fool is unworthy of an answer, right? When Jesus was before Caiaphas, let's go to Matthew 26. And he's before the high priest. Now look. Verse 59, the chief priests, the elders, all the council sought false testimony against Jesus, but found none. And though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. And so finally in verse 62, he says, do you answer nothing? What it is these men testify against you? But Jesus kept silent. Why did he keep silent? Why keep silent in that circumstance? Why not answer the question? Because what did it just say? It said that none of the witnesses could prove anything. And in fact, other passages say they contradicted one another, which automatically meant that it canceled out. So why would he answer the question? So he didn't answer that question. Mark 14:56 says they contradicted one another. But then on the other hand, he turns around and says, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you're the Christ, the Son of God. In Mark 14, he says, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? What did he do then? What did he do with that question? He answered it. He answered any inquiry concerning his true identity. And so what the point, of course, there is that the substance of the question can make a difference, whether you answer it or not. Obviously, as somebody's already said, the motives behind the question can determine whether we should answer it or not. Another example, Pilate sent him over to Herod Antipas, the same Herod that had killed John the Baptist. Obviously, Jesus didn't have much respect for him. And if you go into Luke 23, it says he questioned him with many words, and Jesus answered him nothing. Why not? Why not answer Herod's words, his questions? Well, what would be the point? I mean, Herod was the worst of the worst, and he wasn't going to change. He just wanted to see Jesus really for a show. He wanted to see maybe a miracle, maybe to make fun of him. But the conversation wasn't going to go anywhere, so, why answer the man's questions? Answering his questions, giving him a response, all that would have done was maybe dignify the whole ungodly procedure. Because they stood around and made fun of him. So it's interesting the way the Bible is, and critics, like to use things like this. They take them out of context and they say, see, the Bible contradicts itself, but it doesn't, because they leave out the context. So if I go to 1 Peter 3:15, what does it tell me that I'm to do? Everybody knows this passage. What does it say? I'm to be what? I'm to be ready to do what? To give an answer. I'm to be ready to give an answer to anybody that asks a reason for the hope that's in me, right? But if I go into 2 Timothy 2, 1 Timothy 6, Titus 3, it'll say things like, but foolish and ignorant questionings refuse, knowing that they do what? Gender strife. So, on the one hand, I'm told to be ready to answer people's questions. And on the other hand, I'm told, don't answer these people's questions. Well, again, we're looking at the context. It's easy to see why. I should be ready to answer an honest inquirer's questions about the faith or the gospel, anything about it. But I don't have to answer the questions of people that are just looking to stir up trouble, cause a fight. And let me tell you, this goes on more within the brotherhood than it does from people outside the church. We get letters from people. Our eldership gets letters from people. We don't even know who they are. Send me a 5 or 10 page letter asking me, wanting to know what our position on this and that is because they're in a fuss with somebody 6 states away. You know, what do y'all... And then they expect an answer. I don't even know them. And they want me to put it in writing, which we will not do. Just so they can put it on the internet, I'm sure. I don't owe these people an answer. I don't oversee them. They're not under the work here. But we get them all the time. People thinking they're entitled to an answer about something. And you can just tell from the tone. They're either in a fight with somebody or they're wanting to start one.
I've had people in Bible class that were fighting with other people and they asked a question in class.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, 2 people into it in the same class, I want them to ask a question, just take a dig at the other one. Yeah, that's fun stuff too. So it all depends on the purpose of the question, the motive of the question. And of course, when Jesus answered questions, he got to the point. He was focused. He knew how to ask them. He knew how to answer them. He knew how to use them. And he knew when he should answer and when he shouldn't answer. And those are the kinds of things, not just really for teachers, but for all of us as Christians, we need to learn from that. As I think about questions, I also think about our next little topic we want to emphasize, and that is Jesus and, you might say, Jesus and controversy, or Christ as a controversialist. You know, Jesus was meek and lowly, was he not? Humble. You know, except, of course, it's interesting, I remember I've got a book at home in my library by Brother Warren, and it's called The Lamb Who is a Lion. Now, where did he get that from? The Lamb Who is a Lion. In Revelation, of course, he's depicted as the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. But we're also told he is the Lion from where? The tribe of Judah. The way, the truth, and the life. And so, when you think about it, if you are the way, the truth, the life, if something challenges anything or anyone that's going to lead you from that way, or deny the truth, or get in between men and the possibility of life, if you're the way, the truth, and the life, and somebody wants to get in the way of all that, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You just going to sit by and keep your mouth shut? No, not Jesus. Not when truth is challenged. He allowed no theories, customs, systems having to do with human life or our destiny to go unchallenged that weren't in accord with the truth. I like what one commentator said, no one will be a controversialist of any kind who does not have a clear appreciation of the value of truth and of his own responsibility in maintaining and propagating it. He who feels the infinite life-giving value of truth and the fatal folly of error, coupled with a deep sense of his responsibility and duty of their irrepressible conflict, will be a controversialist like Jesus was. And I've heard people say in the past, I don't like it when people, you argue, you get in arguments, or you name names, this, that, and the other. Well, I understand it. Nobody likes that. I don't think normal people. I've known some people that just like to argue for the sake of arguing. Yes, there are people like that. But by and large, most people are not like that. Most preachers I know are not like that. There are some that are. Because we've had some dealings with some. But by and large, people don't like confrontation. We try to avoid it if at all possible. But there comes a time we don't have any choice but to stand up for the truth. Pilate, he didn't think much of truth, did he? He thought truth was, I'm not even sure there is such a thing. And if there is such a thing, I certainly don't think it's dying for Jesus. So why don't you compromise it and let's avoid all this. What did Jesus say to Pilate? For this cause I came into the world that I might what? Bear witness to the truth. Those that are the truth hear my voice. Pilate didn't think much of it, but Jesus did. What's the only antidote for evil? What's the antidote for evil? Good. What's the only antidote for error? Truth. And so, unfortunately, we live in a world that's filled with error. And people need the truth. And that's going to be controversial because you know what? People don't like to be either told they're wrong or to feel like they're wrong. You don't even have to tell them sometimes. How many times have you had a discussion with somebody and you showed them a passage, maybe whatever? You didn't say anything. He that believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that does not believe will be condemned. You show somebody that passage, they read it, and they look up from the page. I've seen this happen. You didn't say a thing. All you did was read the passage, which came straight from the mouth of Jesus, and they look up at you and say, well, you say I'm going to hell. No, I didn't. I didn't say anything. But people don't like to be wrong, and they don't like to feel like they're wrong. And they don't like you to make them feel like they're wrong. And that's going to cause some controversy. And granted, some people have the wrong motives and goals and methods. But I like what one person said, everybody is a controversialist at some time or another in their lives. You can't go your whole life without disagreeing with somebody or getting in an argument with somebody. And sometimes we're willing to argue over things that really aren't that important and not argue about things that are important. I mean, frankly, there's not a position, there's not a philosophy, there's not a belief in this world that doesn't have some controversy around it, because if you say yes about something, somebody else is going to say no. If you affirm something about something, there's somebody out there that's going to deny. I mean, I can't help but think of the political world in which we live. A person of a particular political party may get up and say something that frankly is obvious to everyone that it's true and common sense. But if you're in the other party, what? You can't say that. You can't just say, oh yeah, that guy makes sense. You're going to automatically deny, even if it's stupid to deny. That's the way people are. That's the world we live in. You know, the common people, the Bible tells us, heard Jesus gladly. But as soon as the religious leaders realized that Jesus was challenging their traditions and position, what did they do? They went ballistic. You know, have you seen these people in the news lately? hollering and yelling. These are supposed to be our elected officials. You know, hollering and yelling. You know, if you don't like something, I mean, that's what legislature's for and laws are. You know, go take it up. But instead they get on TV and they get a big mob together and they holler and they yell. Now, that's basically what the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they couldn't stand it. They were jealous. And so they would resort to various tactics. See if you don't see some of these tactics used today in our society against the ones they used against Jesus. First of all, they called him names. Ever seen anybody do that? You got a position they can't refute, so what do they do? What did they say about Jesus? What name did they call him? John 8. No, before that. They said he's a what? He's a Samaritan. Oh man, you can't get any lower than that. They called him a Samaritan. Right? So they called him names. Now this is one that we've seen in our day. In John 8 also, they challenged his sanity. He's got a demon. I remember the whole first 4 years of President Trump. He's not all there cognitively. Man's out of his mind. We got to have tests. That's what the media was telling us. Man's out of his mind. So we kicked him out of office to put a guy in that was out of his mind, that was senile. And I'm not saying anything that you don't know. I'm not making this up. But I'm telling you, it's the same tactics. Evil people use the same tactics no matter how many thousands of years go by. And with Jesus, they called him names. And then they said he was insane. He had a devil. And don't get me wrong, I didn't say that Donald Trump and Jesus were the same. I'm just using this as examples. It could be in any circumstance, even in your own life. You get into it with somebody at the office or at work. Well, they do. They call you names. Number 2, guy's out of his mind. Or her. Number 3, they had to accept that he could do miracles, but he did them by what? Power of the devil. This one I love, John chapter 7. Without even investigating his credentials, they tried to discredit him by referring to the part of the country he was from. He comes out of where? Well, he comes out of Nazareth. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of North Mississippi? Eastern Arkansas? Anywhere in the South, you bunch of backwater hayseeds? You know, just from where you're from. You know? So people use that against you. Well, you're not from... Well, this is one I like. It's similar to that. And in fact, they use that too against him. They challenged his authority. They challenged his authority because he didn't get it from them, right? He didn't get it from the recognized authorities of the day. So what do people do today? Well, where'd you go to school? Well, I got a 2-year degree at Southwest, and then I finished at University of Memphis. Well, I went to Yale or Stanford or New York University. Same thing. Where'd you go to school? Where are you from? Where you got your education from? Well, our preacher over here at the denominational church, he's Dr. So-and-so, right? So I know he's got to be right. Our pastor, Dr. So-and-so, got his doctorate at Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary or some other seminary. He's got 15 degrees, various masters of divinity and doctorates of theology and Old Testament whatever. And your preacher got a 2-year degree from the Memphis School of Preaching. Right? So, who's right? Who's wrong? That's what they did to him. He didn't come from the right schools. He didn't come from the right place. They accused him of sin that he didn't commit, breaking the Sabbath, right? You ever heard that phrase? I know you have, birds of a feather flock together, right? What did they accuse him of? Why does your teacher eat with who? Matthew chapter 9. Why does he eat with who? Publicans and sinners. What's the implication? You're going to eat with them. Birds of a feather flock together, right? You're one of them. You're a sinner. You're a publican. Same kind of accusation. We go on and on. And of course, eventually all of their false accusations ended up turning into violence. And they killed him. Controversial. But Jesus also turned it around on them. But Jesus was one that always told the truth. You know, he didn't condemn people because of where they were born or how many degrees they had, what color they were, who they hung out with. None of that. He charged and condemned people based upon their attitudes and their behavior. Not things we have no control over. And he brought a lot of accusations against them with regard to their self-righteousness. The Tuesday before he was put to death on Friday had a lot of controversy and turmoil. And it takes up about 20% of the gospel account of Matthew. Turn over to Matthew 23. And notice what he said about them. Somebody says, well, I don't like controversy. Well, read Matthew 23. See if Jesus would avoid it. Sometimes people read this chapter and they think that, man, Jesus was a little bit harsh. A little bit hard on these people. But of course, we know the problem with the scribes and Pharisees, if you looked up the word, we sometimes use this, but if you looked up the word hypocrite in Webster's dictionary, you would see a picture of who? Scribes and the Pharisees, right? They were walking examples. And they didn't preach what they practiced. As far as the law of Moses was concerned, they bound their own traditions upon people. They were religious show-offs. And so he blasts them throughout this chapter. Talking about controversial. They were obstacles to those who wanted to enter the kingdom, verse 13. Zealous in evangelism, but only producing their own hypocritical clones, verse 15. Blind guides who like to nitpick things that had no religious validity, verses 16 through 22. Remember how they would give a tenth of the smallest plants in their gardens, but would ignore weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, faith. Wash the outside of cups, the illustration's given, and plates, but leaving waste on the food sides. They were like whitewashed tombs, verses 28 and 29. Profess to honor the prophets of old, and yet sons of the same devious persecutors, verse 31. Filling up the measure of Hebrew violence that would eventually spill over onto them and the rest of the people, verse 32. Like poisonous snakes, verse 33. And it all got to the point that what was going to happen by the time he got to the end of this chapter, verse 37. What was going to happen? You talking about controversy. Jesus said, and basically, he didn't say 40, but in 40 years from now, All the blood of the righteous people that y'all have killed over the years, culminating in killing me, will result in God's judgment on you. Now, do you think they were happy to hear that? You think, oh, that everybody was all, oh, that was a great sermon. No, not hardly. Controversy has an evil name. Nobody conjures up negative emotions. And here's the thing, and I'll leave you with this. Jesus desperately wanted to bring a message of peace and hope and joy. But the vast number of people that lived then and the vast number of people that live now will refuse Him. They will rebel against Him. And so we're always going to be controversial when you preach the gospel. And when He comes back, He will not be a loving, compassionate teacher. He'll be a what? He'll be a judge. So, if a little controversy saves somebody, it's worth it. All right. We'll delve into something else next week.